Every decision you made caused real damage, and now you have to face it. You wasn't just someone who made bad choices, you was the one who planned the pain and watched it happen without blinking. Your policies broke up families, drained money from our cities, and left places like Los Angeles to suffer. Recently, during a heated congressional hearing on national urban unrest, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't just raise eyebrows, she triggered political shockwaves when she directly blamed former White House advisor Stephen Miller for the chaos that erupted in Los Angeles. With cameras rolling and the entire political world watching, Crockett turned the spotlight not merely on a city in crisis but on a man whose fingerprints, she argued, were all over its dysfunction. Her words weren't wrapped in pleasantries or bureaucratic jargon, they were sharp, clear, and damning. All roads lead to you, Stephen. What followed was not only a dramatic clash of ideologies but also a raw confrontation about accountability, race, and the systemic wounds that cities like Los Angeles are grappling with. What happened that day was more than a political debate, it was a public reckoning. As Jasmine Crockett sat upright in her chair, eyes narrowing and voice unwavering, the tension in the chamber was so thick it seemed to bend the air. This wasn't just another congressional hearing, this was an indictment, and Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to President Donald Trump, was firmly in the crosshairs. Miller, famous for his hawkish immigration policies and uncompromising rhetoric on law and order, arrived prepared for criticism, but he wasn't ready for Crockett's meticulously constructed narrative. She didn't confront him with vague complaints or hypothetical grievances. She came armed with facts, timelines, and the lived experiences of millions whose lives were shaped by his policy blueprints. With the calm precision of a prosecutor, she accused him of being a central architect of decisions that fanned the flames of division, hollowed out municipal budgets, and sharpened disparities now tearing Los Angeles apart. The exchange began formally, Crockett inviting Miller to elaborate on his past recommendations to starve sanctuary cities of federal support. Miller launched into talking points about sovereignty and security, but Crockett sliced through the rhetoric. Do you recognize, she asked slowly, that your fingerprints lie atop every failure, turning LA into a pressure cooker of economic despair and civil unrest? Her voice hovered between steel and sorrow. Miller, visibly rattled, attempted to deflect, muttering that local mismanagement, not federal strategy, was to blame, but Crockett leaned forward, eyes locked on Miller, refusing to let him wriggle free. She unspooled data on housing cuts, mental health funding collapses, and community policing grants that disappeared after 2017. She summoned stories from single mothers displaced after mass evictions, street counselors laid off when youth outreach budgets vanished, and immigrant teenagers left in limbo after sweeping ICE raids. One by one she laid them at Miller's feet until the room fell silent, the gravity settling like dust after an explosion. Crockett's indictment drew strength from weaving macro-historic context with visceral testimony. She reminded the chamber that Los Angeles, city of sunshine and cinematic dreams, carries scars stretching back decades: 1965's Watts Uprising, 1992's Rodney King Rebellion, 2020's George Floyd protests. Each eruption, she argued, was a flare in a long emergency. But the current crisis, she said, bore Miller's unmistakable imprint: the decision to slash housing and urban development's community block grants, the aggressive directives pressuring local police departments to serve as federal immigration enforcers, the chilling memoranda recommending that pandemic relief bypass jurisdictions labeled lawless. These moves, Crockett insisted, were not isolated choices, they formed a coherent strategy of abandonment that left already strained cities scrambling to fill cavernous budget holes exactly when residents needed them most. Miller's rebuttal leaned on nostalgia for a bygone vision of order. He invoked tales of unchecked gangs and surging fentanyl, insisting strong borders were the first prerequisite of public calm. But Crockett's patience dissolved. You built a climate of fear and called it order, she fired back. And now that fear has metastasized into anger, she highlighted how deportation raids sowed mistrust so deep that domestic abuse victims stopped reporting crimes, leaving predators brazen. How Latino families avoided vaccination centers because uniformed officers stood guard. How entrepreneurs on East Cesar Chavez Avenue shuttered for good when foot traffic evaporated. Fear kills community, she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury. And policies drafted in darkness always bloom in suffering. Outside committee walls, Crockett's words ricocheted across media feeds like sparks from flint striking stone. Within hours, #AllRoadsLeadToYou was trending. Civic tech watchdogs posted side-by-side maps overlaying homelessness increases with the timeline of Miller-era HUD cuts. Epidemiologists shared studies showing how immigration crackdowns correlate with lower public health engagement. Pastor Raymond Lopez of South Central live-streamed testimonials from congregants whose families were torn apart by raids. Each narrative reinforced Crockett's charge that federal choices, far from abstract debates, manifested in broken window storefronts, overcrowded encampments along the 101 freeway, and restless youth pushing shopping carts piled with everything they owned. Back in Washington, the political calculus shifted swiftly. Progressive caucus members demanded an oversight series on federal complicity in city decay. Moderate Democrats who once emphasized bipartisan solutions found themselves pressed by constituents citing Crockett's litany of harms. Even a handful of conservatives privately conceded the hearing exposed uncomfortable truths about consequences that outlived four-year terms. The White House communications team scrambled to distance current policy priorities from Miller's legacy, while press secretaries for several GOP senators quietly scrubbed supportive quotes from archived websites. Meanwhile in Los Angeles, Crockett's words ignited solidarity. Community organizers arranged pop-up town halls under murals of Kobe Bryant and Dolores Huerta, projecting the hearing onto brick walls after dusk. Residents clapped when Crockett demanded that as much energy be invested in trauma counseling as in tactical gear. Within 48 hours, city council members referenced her testimony while renewing calls for a federal urban rescue package. A formerly reticent business coalition, anxious about eroding consumer confidence, released a statement endorsing a bold federal-city partnership echoing Crockett's prescription for investment over intimidation. Miller, who once wielded Twitter storms like thunderbolts, remained conspicuously silent. Reports surfaced of him canceling a planned podcast appearance. Columnists noted he appeared gaunt, eyes darting leaving a D.C. restaurant. Political veterans recognized the phenomenon. The oxygen of reputation suddenly thinned when a narrative sticks. Crockett had supplied that narrative, not with bombast but with granular, emotionally resonant detail. By tracing a line from policy memo to displaced tenant, she stripped abstractions away, forcing a reckoning not only for Miller but for every policymaker who ever signed off on austerity disguised as strategy. Crockett did not stop at condemnation. She pivoted, still in the same hearing, to prescribe repair. She laid out a three-point plan: immediate restoration of block grant funding pegged to cost of living escalators, a federal city restorative justice trust dedicated to neighborhoods hardest hit by combined immigration and pandemic traumas, and a civil rights era-style commission empowered to subpoena records on how federal directives shaped policing patterns. The cure must be proportionate to the wound, she said. Several representatives who had sat motionless during her cross-examination now scrambled for pens, whispering to aides. When Miller tried to interject that such measures constituted federal overreach, Crockett countered. Federal fingers plucked the threads, now federal hands must mend them. In subsequent interviews, Crockett emphasized her argument was not anti-law enforcement but pro-community. She lauded Los Angeles officers who built trust through bilingual outreach programs gutted when budgets tanked. She praised faith-based shelters turned away from FEMA reimbursements yet still feeding the hungry. She championed entrepreneurs launching mobile mental health clinics in Skid Row with crowdfunding dollars. They are proof our communities possess resilience, she told one broadcaster. Imagine what they could do if Washington stopped kneecapping them. The emotional crescendo peaked when Crockett read from the diary of Clarissa Fuentes, a 19-year-old deported to Tijuana after both parents were detained in a warehouse raid. Clarissa wrote of sleeping in phone booth alcoves, of missing her biology final, of listening to LA radio stations at night to feel close to home. Your policies made children exiles, Crockett whispered, voice cracking. The gallery gasped. Even hardened politicos looked away, eyes glistening. Miller sat frozen, tie askew, unable or unwilling to muster a response. At that moment the hearing transcended politics, becoming a mirror held up to the nation's conscience. Analysts will long debate why this confrontation landed harder than countless previous committee brawls. Was it Crockett's unflinching specificity? Her willingness to stitch statistics to flesh and blood? Or was America finally ready, after pandemic grief, racial justice uprisings, and relentless economic shocks, to connect the dots between policy choices and ground-level despair? Whatever the reason, the Crockett-Miller exchange pried open a space for honest talk rarely achieved under Capitol Hill's marble dome, a space where causation supplants scapegoating and empathy overrules optics. The ripple effects extend beyond Washington and Los Angeles. Mayors in Phoenix, Denver, and Miami cited Crockett while lobbying congressional delegations for infrastructure relief. Union leaders representing teachers, nurses, and transit operators circulated her closing remarks in newsletters, highlighting how federal cuts strained city services even before crises hit. Graduate students in public policy programs dissected the hearing in seminars, seeing it as a case study in narrative power, how framing, when wielded by a savvy communicator, can redraw the battle map overnight. Through it all, Crockett remained laser-focused. Asked whether she feared backlash, she smiled wryly. If telling the truth becomes punishable, then let history tally my sentence. She acknowledged systemic issues cannot be pinned on one man alone, yet insisted naming architects is essential to avoid repeating errors. Accountability is the first step toward healing, she told a local PBS affiliate. Viewers flooded station inboxes with thank you notes, some admitting they had never heard a representative articulate the links between federal fiscal policy and neighborhood trauma so plainly. Washington's response is now partially measurable. The House Judiciary Chair agreed to schedule follow-up hearings probing the fiscal impact of immigration enforcement directives on municipal budgets. A bipartisan draft bill emerged proposing to reinstate and expand the Burn Justice Assistance Grant with guardrails rewarding departments that adopt community trust protocols. Meanwhile, watchdog NGOs are compiling dossiers cross-referencing Miller-era memos with spikes in eviction filings, aiming to spur a potential class action lawsuit alleging intentional harm. None of these developments guarantee immediate relief for families sleeping under freeway overpasses tonight, but they mark progress fueled by a single hearing where one lawmaker refused to sanitize the truth. Amid the legislative churn, human stories continue to surface. A street vendor named Don Mauricio told reporters he kept a photo of Crockett taped inside his tamale cart, calling her a light for invisible people. A theater troupe in Boyle Heights announced a docudrama titled All Roads Lead to You, premiering on Independence Day, blending verbatim transcripts from Crockett's questioning with original music drawn from mariachi and hip-hop traditions. Artists paint murals of Crockett standing defiantly across from a silhouette labeled Policies, depicting a tug-of-war over a stylized city skyline. These cultural echoes underscore how politics at its most potent can inspire art, solidarity, and hope. Back in the committee, as the gavel finally fell, Crockett closed with words destined for soundbite immortality. We cannot fix what we refuse to face, and we cannot heal what we refuse to name. Today we faced it, today we named it, and tomorrow we begin the work. Reporters rushed the dais. Miller slipped out a side door. One aide later claimed he muttered, "They'll forget by next week." Yet polling indicates otherwise. A majority of Americans polled afterward agreed federal policy decisions have significantly contributed to current urban crises. In a deeply polarized era, such consensus is rare. Crockett achieved it not through centrism but through clarity, through an unwavering insistence that civic neglect has architects, and ignoring that fact perpetuates suffering. As days turn into weeks, the question shifts from blame to blueprint. Crockett continues convening virtual town halls linking LA activists with Detroit, Baltimore, and New Orleans counterparts, fostering a multi-city coalition advocating for what she terms dignity infrastructure, affordable housing, mental health clinics, and youth opportunity pipelines financed through redirected federal enforcement funds. She argues this is not charity but strategic investment. You cannot build national security on the backs of starving cities, she says. Donors previously obsessed with election cycle spending now explore endowments backing her coalition's pilot programs. Venture philanthropy podcasts dedicate episodes to the model, terming it post-partisan pragmatism anchored in moral clarity. Meanwhile, Miller's sphere shrinks. Corporate media outlets, wary of association, limit his airtime. Documents leaked from a conservative think tank reveal internal debate over whether to shutter an urban policy initiative he helped design. The memo's margins bear scribbled notes. Crockett hearing fallout? Rebrand needed? It is a stark reversal for a man once lauded in certain circles as the ideological architect of a hardline renaissance. Crockett's confrontation has rendered his brand toxic, not because she shouted him down, but because she documented his legacy with irrefutable evidence and refused to let the conversation pivot away. Yet Crockett warns sympathizers against viewing Miller's dissent as victory. Real triumph, she says, will be measured in housing starts, school counselor hires, and moms who no longer fear a knock at the door. She travels to Los Angeles, standing beneath the 5th Street overpass at dawn, distributing care packages with local volunteers. Cameras capture her but she shrugs them off. Policy begins in places like this, she tells a journalist, gesturing to tents lining the sidewalk like a makeshift cityscape. Residents approach to thank her for speaking our pain in rooms where power listens. She listens back, scribbling names and numbers, promising follow-up. For now, symbolism and substance fuse, words released under bright Capitol lights echoing in gray morning mist along Skid Row. Political historians will likely mark the Crockett-Miller hearing as a turning point, a moment when the narrative blaming urban decay solely on local mismanagement finally cracked. They will note how a single representative, leveraging empathy and data, punctured decades of scapegoating and opened a path toward systemic accountability. Whether that path leads to transformative policy depends on sustained public pressure and legislative will. But one fact is already indisputable. Jasmine Crockett proved the power of naming names and drawing lines of causation in a world eager to dilute responsibility into abstraction. And so, as our story winds toward its next chapter, remember this confrontation is not an isolated spectacle. It is a clarion call demanding that we examine how every vote, every budgetary line, every rhetorical flourish reverberates in neighborhoods far from C-SPAN cameras. If Crockett's courage resonated with you, if you believe more people need to see how truth, spoken bluntly, can shift the nation's compass, then take a moment right now to like this video. subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us amplify voices holding power accountable and ensures these crucial stories reach every corner of the country. Together we can keep the spotlight trained where it matters most and keep pushing for the justice our communities deserve.